Well, all this month we have been dreaming together, awakening our imagination for what it means to be the Church of Jesus in the times that we find ourselves living in 2024, the strange modern times that we're in. And we've talked about how we are called to be this countercultural movement. And the definition that we're using for counterculture is right here. A counterculture is a group of people with values that reject the dominant values and behaviors of society. You have like the hippie movement, you have the cryptocurrency movement currently, all these different movements. But what's common about all of them is that they rejected the status quo for what society said was normal and how we should act. And that's what I believe is a beautiful picture of what the church could be and should be today. We've talked about this temptation for the church to gather together as a subculture, to hunker down and sing about the good old days and say that we can't wait until we get to be evacuated to go up to heaven someday because the world's going to you know what, right? And that's a temptation that we have because things change and the world is changing rapidly. But that's not our call. We also talked about what I believe to be a dangerous temptation that's gaining steam in our country right now, to be a dominating culture. Like the Christians, the church should be dominating culture and trying to make culture Christian without actually serving people and loving people for them to become Christian first. And we talked about this elusive, seductive idea of dominating people and making them Christian by our way of life. And I think that is a folly as well. That's a farce. That's not what we're called to be. I believe we're called to stand out, to be odd, to be eccentric like we talked about last week, which means to be off center from the way that our culture is, to reject the norm and to stand out and look like Jesus and serve like Jesus and welcome like Jesus. What a novel idea, right? But we talked about inside of this countercultural call of Jesus, it's actually found in the scriptures all over the place. One place that has been an anchor text for us has been Paul writing to a group of Jesus followers in a Roman colony called Philippi. In our New Testaments, it's Philippians chapter 3, verse 20. Paul says this: their mind being the dominant culture, the cultural moment, just the air, the zeitgeist of the culture, is set on earthly things. In other words, it's set on our animalistic appetites. If I want it, I'm going to take it. It's all about me, a dog eat dog kind of thing. That's what it means to have your mind set on earthly things. But Paul contrasts that. He says, no, that's not what you're called to do. He says, but our citizenship is in heaven. We've talked about this phrase, our citizenship of heaven. It's something when I was growing up, I thought that meant that I don't belong here. I don't need to worry about what's going on earth because I'm going to get up to be with Jesus someday and get my sky mansion and all is going to be good. So that's really what I need to be thinking about, is going to heaven because I'm a citizen of heaven. But that's not the case. A citizen of Rome and a citizen of heaven was this play that Paul was using, saying that you're called to live in this upside down kingdom here and now, to spread the values and the way of heaven where you live. We're called to trust the upside down reality of God. Jesus talked about this upside down kind of living all the time. He said that blessed are the meek because they're going to inherit the earth. Jesus would say things like, you want to be great? Serve everyone. Be a servant of all. Race to the back of the line. Jesus also said something that I still wrestle with, and I just to confess, like sometimes I think I disagree with Jesus on, but this was another upside down thing that Jesus said often. His friends recorded it in the book of Acts, reminding themselves of what Jesus said. Jesus said, it's more blessed to give than to receive. It's more blessed. That word blessed means, it's makarios in the Greek, and it actually means happy. So Jesus was actually saying, you're going to be happier if you give than when you receive. Now, like I said, I wrestle with this actively, and I've wrestled with this for the longest time, because this might be one of those statements of Jesus where you're like, yeah, Jesus, that sounds right, but I don't know if it's smart. Like, Jesus, that sounds right. Like, we should think that, but we're not angels. Like, what are you talking about, Jesus? Right? And I wrestle with this upside down reality of Jesus when he talks about my stuff, my money, my bank account. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, you are the lucky people that came to church on a Sunday when we're doing a giving, generosity, money talk. Woohoo! You laugh. No one said woohoo with me. Here's the reality. We're all kind of triggered by these kind of messages if we grew up in church, right? And can I let you in on a secret? I don't like it either. Ask my wife. I've been so stressed this week about doing this. And it's an interesting thing because our money is so personal. And I have been in church where I think well-intentioned people have tried to manipulate people with these messages. And people have left with guilt and shame and no joy, and definitely not what Jesus is after when he talks about money. But at the same time, some scholars believe that Jesus talked about money about 25% of every word we have recorded is him talking about money. 1/4 of everything that he said in the Gospels. Can you imagine if every fourth message I gave was on money? None of y'all would be here. But I think it beckons us to lean in, actually, to ask questions of what was Jesus on about? What is he about? And especially in this cultural moment that we find ourselves in, I think it's encouraging for us to consider that what Jesus was offering as a countercultural vision is still countercultural today. Every week we've been talking about these different eras that I feel like we're living in. And yes, I'm in my Taylor Swift thing right now. Oh my gosh, that was a literal woot for that. We talked about the eras of outcast and enemies. We talked about the eras of the selfie and all about ourselves. Today, I want to offer a vision for a countercultural movement to this that we're living in. The era of not enough. So when I think about the way that we approach our stuff, our resources, our investments, our bank accounts, I think this describes it quite well. And hear me, I am living in the same world that you are, where wages are stagnant and inflation is wild and grocery shopping is painful. And I meet us all there. But at the same time, I believe that it's really easy for us to point fingers at some headlines about greed and some corporate greed, or can you believe what this person did, and point the fingers out there. It's a lot harder for us to actually turn the mirror around on ourselves and consider ways that we're living in this not enough era where we're super stressed about money, where we're anxious about our resources, where we feel like our pie is just shrinking, so we have to white knuckle and hold on to our resources more than we ever have before because we don't know if there will be enough. I think there's like this everyday selfishness and greed that maybe you're better than I am, quite possibly you're better than I am, but I wrestle with different ways that greed seeps into my heart. And I think about this in lots of different ways, just how selfish I can be with my time and how greedy I can be with my time. I have 3 kids, 5 and under, and so now I look back at this other period of my life where there was the possibility of being home and being bored. Some of you know what I'm talking about. It's just, I didn't realize how selfish I was with my me time until I had kids that were all the time, daddy, 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 mommy, daddy, watch, like all this all the time. And if I can just confess to you, a little reverse confessional here. A lot of times I will just lock myself in the bathroom for just 10 minutes and I don't have to go. I just need 10 minutes, right? And greed seeps into my heart that way because I'm like trying to think about myself and taking care of myself in those little moments. Also, I think greed seeps into my heart, maybe many of our hearts. I think I operate so often off of this assumption that Pastor Andy Stanley calls the consumption assumption. You guys ever heard of this? The consumption assumption. The consumption assumption has this as its core assumption. It says that if money comes to me, it's for me to consume. If money comes to me, it's for me to consume. And maybe those I'm legally obligated to take care of too, but it's for me and mine to consume. That's a consumption assumption. I have this play out in my life often. Part of my role as a pastor is I have the privilege of serving people at weddings and at funerals. And I don't know why, but people like to pay me in cash. And I don't have a lot of cash outside of that. So what I have is in my glove box in my 2013 Buick Verano, I have an envelope of what I call panda money. It's cash because I can go to the OG Panda Chinese restaurant in Kokomo, the real Panda. I'm going to lose some people on that one. But because they only take cash. Let me tell you, I'm loaded in panda money right now. But what that means is that the money comes to me and I'm immediately thinking, this is for my panda. This is for my General Tso's and my crab rangoon with the red sauce. Like, that's what this is for. I don't even think about other reasons that money might have come to me. It's the consumption assumption. Also, I know in my life so often, and I've heard this so many times in pastoral counseling over the last 15 years, we have this thought. I have this thought so often, man, if I made more money, I would be more generous. If I just had a bigger salary, if I had more fluid cash, man, I would be so generous to the church. I would be so generous to these nonprofits and charities that mean so much to me if I just had more money. And it broke my heart to find out that that's actually a fallacy. Social sciences has taught us that is a fallacy. The Chronicle of Philanthropy does studies on generosity all the time, and they found that families making $50,000 to $70,000 a year gave on average 7.6% of those resources to discretionary giving, to profits, churches, nonprofits, people that make $50,000 to $70,000 a year. The same study studied people that make $200,000 to $250,000 a year. And people that made so much more money, on average, gave 2.8% of that discretionary money away. It's almost as if the more money that we have, the more grip it has on us. It's a fallacy to think that maybe someday, then I'll be generous if I'm making more money. Anybody ever gotten a raise and you celebrate getting a raise and like 2 months later, you're just like moved your standard of living up. You don't even think about having a raise anymore. We've all been there. Enter into this moment, this era of not enough and scratching and clawing for more and holding on to what we have. This ragtag rabbi from the Galilee, Jesus, who comes on the scene. And he's talking about money all the time. Do you ever think it's interesting why Jesus talks about money all the time? Jesus didn't have a capital campaign for a building he had to pay for, right? He didn't have a staff or to get a salary from those resources. You might not know this, but like a bunch of wealthy women actually bankrolled Jesus' ministry. So shout out to the wealthy women. But he talked about money all the time, even though he didn't need money to keep the thing going. Why was he on about it all the time? 25% of everything he said. I think Jesus, he knew something that maybe we deep down know, but we don't like to say out loud, is that there is a direct line between our hearts and our stuff. And what Jesus is after is not your stuff or your money. He's after your heart. He wants you to be free, and he wants you to thrive and live in this kingdom reality that he's inviting us into. And he knows that our greatest enemy is not secularism. Our greatest enemy is not the Republicans or MAGA or the progressives. Our greatest enemy, I offended everybody equally. Our greatest enemy is in here. And it's the stuff that might be too entrenched in our hearts. So what I want to do is I'm not going to go to Malachi 3 to give you the classic tithing message, ripping a story, a couple of verses out of context, making it feel like God's going to like bless you monetarily if you give 10% to him. I'm not going to take you to Nehemiah and make an allegory of building the temple, which was the ancient covenant people thing to do in Nehemiah that we like to rip out of its context and make it all about the church today. I'm not going to do either of those things. We're going to right to the source. We're going to listen to our rabbi, our Lord Jesus, as he gives us a challenging for me, teaching on generosity and what it means to be people of open hands instead of clenched fists so that we can be free. So we're going to be in Luke chapter 11, the end of some of the teaching from the Sermon on the Mount, the greatest message ever given. And Jesus says these words: "No one lights a lamp and puts it in a place where it will be hidden or under a bowl." Jesus is making a joke here. Like, we miss it in all the context, but like Jesus is giving a knee slapper. I'm telling you, he would have had to pause for laughs, unlike I just had to do. He says, nobody lights a lamp and puts it where it's hidden, right? This is something that's lost in our cultural imagination today because of electricity and all the wealthy things that we have. No, but a lamp was expensive. It was a ceramic pot that was filled with oil, and there was no electricity. So for you to get light inside of your home, you had to light this lamp. So you would put it out so it lit up as much room as physically possible. And Jesus goes, no one lights a lamp and puts it in a place where it will be hidden or under a bowl, of course. And everybody's laughing. He goes, instead, they put it on its stand so that those who come in may see the light. And everybody's like, yeah, I get what you're saying now. That's good. Now, what's next, Jesus? And then Jesus breaks into something that is, it sounds like Yoda speak. It sounds very cryptic. And people say that Jesus is confusing. I think often we think about passages like this where I'm like, I don't know what he said. It sounded spiritual. Don't know what he said. But this is what Jesus says the very next verse. Your eye is the lamp of your body. When your eyes are healthy, your whole body also is full of light. But when they are unhealthy, your body also is full of darkness. What in the world, right? This is so confusing. It's so cryptic. It sounds like he's talking like a Jedi or some kind of sorcerer, right? Like, what are we talking about here? And the reality is that this is lost on us with our 21st century ears, but to the first century audience, everybody was nodding their head. They knew exactly what was going on because Jesus was employing a few figures of speech from first century Judaism that they would have picked up on immediately. You know, figures of speech, idioms, slang that we use today, right? One that my grandma used to say all the time was, everything's going to hell in a handbasket, right? You guys have heard that before? It's not just in my hillbilly family, right? Okay. Now, that phrase actually had an original meaning. In the 1840s, they would send people down into the mines during the gold rush. And in that time, they would go down and someone would lower them in a handbasket for them to light up dynamite to open up more of the mine. And it was these deadly consequences possible in the situation. Hell in a handbasket was an idiom. It was a figure of speech. You know, Gen Z today, parents of Gen Z teenagers, you know they have their own language, right? They have their own version of so many things. Those youths today. Could I sound older? Those youths and their Gen Z language. Did you know that there's a Gen Z Bible? Like somebody's gone through and translated the Bible in Gen Z speak. And I've got to share this with you because I don't get to laugh with many people all the time like this. But anyway, here's a classic Bible verse in the NIV, what I preach from. For I am not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. In Gen Z slang, figures of speech, this is what it says. Not swerved by these scripts because Cap G be given that get out of jail free card for the whole fam. I have thoughts. I have so many thoughts. God help us. Anyway, we got to move on from this. This is figures of speech. This is slang. And this is exactly what Jesus is doing in Matthew 11. Let's go back to that verse that was so cryptic. Your eye is the lamp of your body. Come back with me, people. When your eyes are healthy, your whole body is also full of light. But when they are unhealthy, your body also is full of darkness. Now, the Jewish idiom, the figure of speech that he's using is about healthy eyes and unhealthy eyes. It doesn't mean bad eyesight. To have ayin tovah, which is healthy eyes, was an idiom for generous eyes. To see the world with generosity and abundance, and the pie not getting smaller, but the pie expanding. Someone's win doesn't equal your loss. It's ayin tovah, to have healthy eyes. Now, to have unhealthy eyes, right here, is ayin raya, which meant that you had stingy, cynical, critical eyes towards yourself, towards others, towards your stuff. What Jesus is warning us with is how we see the world. He's encouraging us to have healthy eyes. Ayin tovah, good eyes, not bad eyes. In other words, Jesus is doing this. He's letting us know that a good eye sees abundance, a bad eye sees scarcity. A good eye sees the cheesecake as a gift from heaven. A bad eye sees the calorie count on the back. And this, my friends, is not the power of positive thinking. It's much richer and deeper and more tied to our Jesus tradition than you could possibly imagine. Having a good eye, having generous eyes, it's actually a reality check to the way that our world is. It declares in the face of the brokenness of this world that we do not live in a cold, dark, desolate place void of the power of God, but our King is good and kind and generous to everyone. And this is what reality is when we see everything through good eyes, we see abundance. You might have heard about scarcity mindset and abundance mindset. I think those ways of thinking play into what Jesus is saying here about having good eyes and bad, unhealthy eyes. We'll put it this way. A scarcity mindset says this: there will never be enough. There's more month than there is money. Man, they got that account, and so we lost that account, and so we're just going down. Their win is my loss. Oh, this is just so terrible. There'll never be enough to go around. An abundance mindset, having ayin tovah, good eyes, says there's enough for everyone. That God is more creative than I can imagine, and there's enough to go around. I don't need to be afraid because my God takes care of me. Scarcity mindset says this, that I'm going to be stingy. I'm going to white knuckle my stuff. I'm going to hold on to what's mine because I don't know what's going to happen in the market or what's going to happen in my business and profession. So I'm going to be stingy and hold on. Abundance mindset is generous. It's open-handed. It's trusting that God will take care of us. It's saying, I don't want my stuff to get its grip on me, so I'm going to loosen my grip on my stuff. Scarcity mindset is selfish towards others. It's saying, no, I'm going to turn my back on that. I can't fix everything, so I'm going to turn my back on everything here. Selfish towards others. Abundance mindset, it serves others joyfully. It says, yeah, I'm going to serve you. Yeah, I'm going to get my hands dirty. Yeah, I'm going to give of myself for you. And because I think that's where the life is. I'm going to do it joyfully because this is me getting in line with God. This is the good stuff. Scarcity mindset says this, that I'm going to be suspicious towards others. I'm going to be cynical and skeptical. Why are they asking about that? What's their angle? I don't think that they have the best intentions. Abundance mindset believes the best in others. It chooses to fill in the gaps in our suspicion with trust and believes the best. I'm reminded of the wise words from Brene Brown who says, you can choose to believe that everyone is doing the best they know how. That's abundance mindset. And Jesus he's telling us, here's the vision I want you to see the world with kind, generous, good eyes that lead you to abundance and not to scarcity and fear in your life. Jesus says this is going to affect everything. The very next verse in this teaching, Jesus says this. See to it then that the light within you is not darkness. Therefore, if your whole body is full of light and no part of it dark, it will be just as full of light as when a lamp shines its light on you. Jesus says that this is going to affect and infect everything about you, your whole body, your whole life. How you see the world matters. Are you open-handed with good eyes, generous eyes, or are you cynical, skeptical, tight-fisted towards yourself, saying there's just not enough, so I got to watch out for me and mine? Jesus says that this will affect everything. I'm reminded Billy Graham said that if you get your vision of money right, everything else will fall into place under God's kingdom. Jesus says that it's going to affect your whole body, your whole life. So Jesus finishes this bit of teaching, and there's a practical moment in front of him that he actually uses this teaching to exemplify what he's talking about in real life terms. So we're told this, the very next verse again. When Jesus had finished speaking, he gets done with his teaching about good eyes and bad eyes and generosity or scarcity mindset. And he says a Pharisee invited him to eat with him. So he went in and reclined at the table. This is something I want you to know about Jesus. Jesus never refused a meal from a rich person. And you know what? I want to follow Jesus with all my heart, mind, and soul. If you're a wealthy person, I will take a free meal anytime from you. I'll even do the pastor thing and pray before them. I'm just kidding. I'll do that, yeah. But anyway, Jesus always did this. He's eating with a religious leader who's very wealthy and looked upon with dignity in the society. But the Pharisee was surprised when he noticed that Jesus did not first wash his hands or wash before the meal. Now, Jesus didn't ever break the Torah, the Jewish covenantal law, but he did sometimes skirt around some of the cultural fences that were built around it. And one of those cultural fences in the first century that Pharisees laid out was that, you need to really wash every part of your body so you could be holy before you have a meal. And Jesus felt no need to do that when he was eating with this Pharisee. But he notices the side eye. He notices how he looks, Gen Z speak, sus. I do it right, kid? And so he makes a point off of the spirit that this Pharisee says to him. He's like, okay, here's a teaching moment. I know I'm a guest in your home, but you're about to get Jesus schooled is about what's going down, right? We're told this very next verse. Then Jesus said to him, now then, you Pharisees, clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness. You foolish people. Did not the one who made the outside make the inside also? Talk about an awkward dinner moment. But Jesus, he looks at this Pharisee and he's like, man, you guys, you're just missing the mark. You're so close, but you're missing the mark. He says, you clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you're full of greed and wickedness. Now, wickedness is a junk drawer term for different kinds of sin and unrighteousness, but Jesus pulls out greed on the front and center and says, you're struggling with greed. And that means that the inside of you, the interior parts of your life are jacked up and impure, even though everything on the outside looks beautiful. We have this playroom in our house for our 2 boys right now, and will be our daughter here in a year or so. But it's got this like play kitchen with like a play sink and microwave and oven and some storage and a fridge, freezer kind of thing. It's all like IKEA play toys. And it looks so amazing. And our kids love to like play there and fake make meals. Our boys like to make me coffee in the morning from a little fake Keurig in the kitchen. It's so cute. But every now and again, you walk by our playroom and you're like, oh, it just looks so cute, so nice. And I love that our boys love this so much. And then you take a step in and you go, what died? And you open up the play oven and it's not play food. It's real food that's been there for a couple of days. And the inside is putrid. It is terrible. This is the word picture that Jesus is picking up on. He's saying that there can be a way that you live your life where everything looks so holy, so Christian, so evangelical on the outside. But inside, it's jacked. It's messed up. It's wicked. It's full of greed. And I love that Jesus doesn't just like drop the mic, send the Facebook message, subtweet somebody and like hope that they see it and feel guilty online. But Jesus actually gives them the solution to actually being pure from the inside. He says this in the very next verse. But now, as for what is inside you, be generous to the poor, and everything will be clean for you. You want to be clean from the inside out? Jesus says, here's your solution. Be generous to the poor. And this is hard for us to understand as Protestants and like thinking about God's grace and stuff, because Jesus says, and everything will be clean for you. And you know the word for everything in the Greek, what it means? Everything. Jesus says there's something about the posture and the action of looking out where there are things that are broken and people that are struggling. When you serve them joyfully, when you give of yourself, disfranchise yourself so that they can be, something inside of you gets cleaned up. Jesus leans into this guy a little bit more because he's like, dinner's not awkward enough yet. And he leans in and he says this, woe to you, Pharisees. Woe being this guttural, like, oh man, you're missing it. This sigh, this guttural sigh. Woe to you, Pharisees, because you give a tenth or a tithe, we'll come back to that word later, of your mint, rue, and all other kinds of garden herbs. Any of you guys have a garden at home with little herbs, right? Some of you do, even though you're not raising your hand back at me, that's okay. So what Pharisees were doing at this time was that they were actually taking a tenth of everything, their mint. Think about a tenth of a mint leaf, setting it aside and offering it to God. The rue, which wasn't even really edible, but it was in their gardens, they're setting it aside, honoring God by giving a tenth back to God. These little minuscule things and all down to the detail. And this is what Pharisees were doing at this time because they thought that this was the way that God's kingdom was going to come. If they were so clean and they followed Torah all the way to the mark, then God would restore the world. He says, you're doing this all down to the minuscule way, but you neglect justice and the love of God. You should have practiced the latter without leaving the former undone. And then Jesus metaphorically dropped his rabbinical mic and said, I'm skipping dessert, peace. He didn't really say that. But Jesus says, man, you're missing the larger things. You're missing the heartbeat of God, which is justice and the love of God. You're thinking you're doing everything right by sacrificing these little things, and you're missing the big thing in front of you, justice and the love of God. Now, when our Western ears hear about justice, what do we hear? We think about law and order. We think about John Wayne. We think about somebody kicking tail because they did something wrong, right? And they need to be punished. That's what we hear when we hear justice. But you know, the dominant word used for justice in the Hebrew scriptures and our New Testament is the word mishpat. You guys want to say it? I'll say it again. Mishpat. Mishpat. 1, 2, 3. Mishpat is not retributive, punishing justice. It's restorative justice. And this is the dominant picture of justice that the prophets in the Old Testament and Jesus uses is mishpat. It's what's used in Micah 6:8 when God is saying, I don't desire hundreds of bulls and all these sacrifices. What do I want? I want you to act justly, mishpat, to love mercy, to be kind and generous to others, and to walk humbly with God. Jesus picks up on what Micah was saying. He says, this is what God is after. Justice, mishpat, you doing things for people that can't do them themselves, to lift them up, to even the scales. and to show the love of God to others. Don't miss this. Jesus says if you want your stuff to have less of a grip on you, you open-handed give. Jesus says if you want to be in line with what God is doing in the world, we're not doing things because it's a law. We do things because of God who's seeking us to be just and to spread his love for others, not out of duty or obligation, but because as a response of what our Jesus has done for us. To be people of open hands. You know, here at Bridgeway, many of you guys are new. I know we have a lot of guests this morning, and this is awkward to hear if you're here as a guest and all that kind of stuff. But something you might not know about Bridgeway is that we as an organization, as a family of faith, we have built our church on the model of being open-handed. Actually, we say one of our core values here at Bridgeway is this, that we are radically open-handed. That we want to actually see the way that we operate as a church with good eyes, with generous eyes, believing that if so-and-so goes to that church, it's not a loss for us, and that God is abundant, doing more than we could possibly imagine. So we have built our church on this model of being radically open-handed with the resources that people give to our church. And actually, last year as a church, we gave 13% of every dollar that came in back out to our community and to help start new life-giving churches in Indiana. And that worked out to look like this in 2023. In 2023, Bridgeway gave $111,563.71 to our community impact and church planting efforts. We put our money where our mouth is and where the heart of our church is, you guys. This is who we are as a church. Isn't this stinking cool to look at this and see what we can do together? And things have not stopped, even though we moved into a new space with more space and more chairs that we need more of. But this has not stopped. Even this last week, one of our local nonprofit partners, Kokomo Urban Outreach, the UP program that does youth programming to help kids find ways to live into their values and to be part of a successful society, we actually were able to deliver a check to them, this is Deanna there, for $3,000 just this last week because of part of our regular rhythm of giving to our partners, which is another awesome thing that we're still doing in this space, you guys. We're still committed to being those people that are helping today's youth be respectful, responsible, reliable, and ready for whatever comes their way. So this is who we are as a church. And we're going to continue to be that kind of church into the future. But that's the macro. What does it mean for you and I to be radically open-handed people, right? How do we push against the cultural narrative of not enough and white-knuckling and tightly gripping our stuff? I think the scriptures tell us this pretty loud and clear. They give us a practice that is countercultural back then. It's countercultural today. But this is what I want to challenge us individually to be a part of, is to take a step to grow in your generosity. Understanding that the generous life is not about finish lines. It's actually about always being on a journey of growing in our generosity, always being open-handed and believing God for more in our lives. And one of the practices that are spelled out in the Hebrew scriptures and mentioned a couple times in the New Testament for this kind of like growth in generosity, this rhythm of giving is called the tithe. And I can see you all clenching up and freaking out right now in this moment. I love it so much. I can't wait for this to be over either. But let me say this. I know tithe, like giving actually 10% of all that God gives you through your salary and all the things like, that's something that freaks us out, right? I have triggers about that in my life, right? And I imagine that you do too. But let me say a couple things that pastors don't usually say about the tithe. We love to go to Malachi 3 in the Old Testament. We love to rip it out of its context and its story of God's covenantal people, the Hebrew people. And we love to make it all about giving 10% to your local church today. Let me do some spoiler alert here. Just for the way that I study the scriptures, like there wasn't one tithe in the Old Testament. There was like 3, and it wasn't 10%. The news is much worse than that. It was more like 24 to 27% of the total income of people went to God's work in the tithe in the Old Testament. So that's scary news, right? But beyond that, in our New Testament, there's never a command from Jesus for us to tithe 10% to a local church. Honestly, a careful study of the scriptures, there's no local church when Jesus was around to be tithing to. So it's kind of a wacky kind of thing that we do here, where we stand up and say, you need to tithe to the local church in the New Testament world that we live in. That's not the case. But again, the news is much worse and more confusing than just give 10% to your local church, because there's not a percentage that is talked about in the New Testament. If a tithe ended up being 24 to 27% in the Old Testament, we see people tithing in the New Testament, and we're like, what do we actually do? It's confusing, right? Pastors like to make it very clear, but it's not. But the reality is that the news is, again, messier, pricklier, more complicated than that for us today, living in this world today, because what we are commanded to do in our New Testament is to, in a rhythm, give sacrificially to those who are in need, with preference to the poor and preference to the work of the church to serve lost people. We're supposed to regularly, in rhythm, give sacrificially, no percentage, which I hate in my Western mind, right? I need a percentage, Jesus. Give to the poor and to those who are struggling in the local church. That's the only thing. What does it look like for you to grow in that kind of generosity? To not just say, I've met my line, I'm there, not. What does it look like for you to grow in that generosity? Now, I'm not going to give you all the verses and all the things to try to get people to give more. We as a church, we're not struggling. We're not freaking out financially about all this kind of stuff. And so this is not like a money grab at all. But what I do want to do is, just for the last couple minutes, I would just love to get personal with you and share why my wife and I choose to order our personal lives around generosity and giving sacrificially to this church. Every year that my wife and I have been married, we have made it a personal goal to give more to the work of the local church than we did the year before. And we can see it through our tax returns, if you're wondering. Because we believe in what God is doing in the local church. Not just this church, but the local church all around. I want to give you 5 reasons why we give. And this is not something that I'm putting on you. I'm just letting you know where we're at in the Larison household today. And again, this is not coming from a place where I want to guilt anybody or anything like that. I just want to share with you, be honest, why we do it. First is our kids. We have 2 boys that are terrorizing preschool workers this morning. But they're here, and we're partnering with our kids ministry here at Bridgeway to help make little disciples of Jesus, and it matters. Let me share this. Our 5-year-old went to kindergarten a couple weeks ago, and at the end of last week, we were praying before bedtime, and I said, buddy, you want us to pray about anything specific? He goes, yes, I need you to ask God to take my worries away, because it's hard for me to make friends. And my heart melted, and I'm going to start crying right now. So we prayed about it. He gets home, mom picks him up, he runs into the house, and he goes, Daddy, God answered my prayer. I made a friend today. Can we sing to God? This is so awesome. I'm oh my gosh. It matters so much. And just for me, I know that kids ministry, it takes resources to fund it and to make it all go. And I would feel gross if I wasn't participating in that. If I wasn't helping make that thing happen. I would feel gross, just me. And so we give to Bridgeway for the kids ministry. My wife and I, we give because we want to be a part of stories of life change. And man, what an incredible opportunity even to hear today some of the stories of people going from death to life, from being lost to being found, to addiction and hurt to freedom. Man, I want to be a part of that. I want to put fuel on that fire. I want to be a part of what God is doing in the world. And so we give because we want to be a part of stories of life change as God's kingdom reaches into people's lives. Another reason that we give is that we want to give not just to Bridgeway, but through Bridgeway. We want to give through Bridgeway. I really believe that radical generosity should never end at just giving to the church. Radical generosity should go to the church and then through the church. Allison mentioned some of the cries of our community this morning and how we want to come alongside of great ministries and nonprofits and support them. Some of those cries are the homelessness crisis in our community, drug addiction recovery, foster care, women and babies who are vulnerable in this time. We want to come alongside them and support them and give to them and serve them. And $111,000 last year, you guys. How else could we be a part of anything like that but through giving through the local church? And 13% of every time that I give, it's going to that kind of thing. That's why we give, why we live open-handed and order our lives around generosity, not as the end, but as the first thing that we do. Next, I give practically for my health, my emotional health, my spiritual health. I know this, and this is just for me, and you might think I'm crazy for saying this, but the more money that I have to my own vices, the more stressed out I get. the more it feels like it's got its grip on me and I'm thinking about what I can do. And there's a freeing reality of when we have a percentage of our income that's going directly to God and his work, that I actually have less anxiety and less fear because I have less money that I can mess around with. And you might think I'm crazy. I probably am. I'm just telling you why I give. And then the last reason is that when we live open-handedly and we live not tight-gripped, but give first, generosity first, man, it forms us, it shapes us into the people that we long to be. To be somebody who's called a person of commitment and love. Man, that's what I want people to stand up and say about me when I'm gone. Is that I want to be someone who saw needs and met needs and who was faithful and didn't hold on to my stuff as much as I let go. And let me say this. You might be up here and you've been in church and you're cynical about the whole thing. I get that. And you feel like this is just a money grab. They're just after your money. I get that too. Let me say this. This is not about me or Bridgeway getting your money. This is about me wanting you to have a generous heart and be free. So if you don't trust me, if you don't trust what's going on here, man, I want to challenge you. Start giving to a different church. Give to Crossroads Church, Abundant Life Church, Bible Baptist Church, Northview Church. Set up a recurring gift to one of those other churches and see what happens in your life and the good work you get to be a part of. And my elder board is freaking out right now. I want you to be generous because that's where the life is, you guys. Will you trust God in it and see the world through good, generous eyes?